having the diversity of our Indigenous languages in BC, it's very unique to have around 25 to 30 different languages and nations in BC out of 203
Absolutely
communities.
crazy.
It's huge, and I love looking and learning just like you. And even though we say I'm Indigenous, I go to on the West Coast or up north or down south, I learn a wholly different culture, and there's definitely a lot of connections to it. But for me, just to be, I went on, for example, I'll give you a quick run by. Is I went on a canoe trip that I got invited to down in the Okanagan Nation,
Mm.
and it's usually done on July 4th. It's basically a peaceful protest to go from the. It's called the J8 Treaty, and you basically start from Osuyas, go right down into Omak, I think it is, and then not Omak, but what's across from there. But there's another piece of across a border. But they have, it's really cool. You get on these traditional canoes, they carved, and they go across and they meet people. They have a big picnic. July 4th there obviously is like our July 1st day.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's so huge and so many people.
Wow.
And they cheer when we come into those canoes. And it took us about 4 hours to paddle to get there. And it took us about 5 hours because we ate lots and we were lazy, but we came back, and I always said we went against the wind both ways. I tell them so. But for me, just to be involved and invited, and it was a free event. There was no
Mm.
charge to it. It was to come experience the culture and their cultural ways and their protocols and their traditions, and just to get in a canoe and just be part of a canoe family. And it was really neat to, and that's kind of what, again, it resonated to me, to my business, is like, this is what people are looking for.
Mhm.
And it's not just non-indigenous visitors or guests from around the world. It's really has to come from interest.
Mhm.
And definitely, if you look on the Indigenous tourism of Canada statistics and Indigenous tourism of BC, Canada is the number one country that wants to learn about our own Indigenous peoples.
Canadians want to learn
Yeah,
about, yeah.
Yeah.
and that's really cool. I never thought that I'd see that coming, and I can do see it based on building that canoe 2 years ago. Well, God, no, yeah, 2 years ago. How fast people were wanting to come learn,
Mhm.
because we took down this invisible wall. Because it was a business, they thought they had to come into the resort and pay. And when we went to learn about our culture, in reality, it was you can come and sit down and let's work on this canoe and work and then build, and let's talk about the local history behind this canoe.
Oh, this is the one the one you built,
The
right?
project
The
at the
project.
Quail.
Yeah, I went out and saw that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was something.
Yeah, so that was something, and I'm still looking at helping to progress that, even though I'm not employed there at that lodge. And I think I said this a little bit earlier too, was it's not about the money.
Mhm.
A culture has an open opportunity, open end. There is no closure to it, based on how you're gonna learn it and work with the communities and the elders and the youth and the community members and the locals. I think you really have to really understand if it's a business driven thing, then depending on who you are, I'd never allowed people to feel that way. And like you said, I was always inviting.
Mhm.
And because the locals want to learn this much about who we are and what we are. I think the best story, I don't think I've ever explained this story to you, but I did it when I was doing those canoes. I was bringing them around to different shows. And I brought him to this one trade show, and she was around 90 years old. And when we decided to build those canoes, it was 65 years since a canoe was built in that community. So, I got tired of talking about the past. Let's bring the past to the present and let's celebrate it today for the future.
Mhm.
And because I was getting on that July 4th canoe, it was a really simple decision for me, but it wasn't my decision. It was an ideal I had to put on to the elders. They had to really think about it and says, well, the last one they thought it was 65 years. So once we got through the project was about 60% done. And it was so cool when this lady walked up to me, not Indigenous, she lived in that area all her
Mm.
life. And she walked up to basically the end of the show. She had her hands behind her back and she was watching me for most of the day. She wouldn't come to me until the end of the day when most of the people left. Then she finally came up to me and approached me and says, geez, I haven't seen one of these in about 60 years. I looked at her and I go, 65 years to be exact, ma'am, is what we kind of calculate in their community where how this canoe became what it is. I just asked her, well, where did you see one? Oh, she says, my dad and I, when we were younger, he said, we used to watch these canoes come down the river.
Mm.
And I said, oh, okay. He says, I was pretty young then, but my dad was an avid fishermen, canoeists outdoors when he says, but at the time, he says, when we saw the men coming down the river, we knew they were working together and catching the fish. So we didn't want to interrupt them. He was like, oh, I'll leave them alone. They're working, gathering their food for the winter. He never got the opportunity to go to the men and talk to them and say, let's look at his canoe. Well, he passed on. And so what she did, she says, is it okay that if I, look at the canoe? So she went up and down the canoe with her hands. She was looking at everything and looking at the angles. She looked at me and she walked away. Before she walked, she says, thank you. I said, you helped me live out my dad's dream, and I get to now share it with him in heaven. And I looked at her and I go, wow, that gave me goosebumps, because it's like, it wasn't just for, that project was kind of, when I was doing it, was kind of for the Indigenous to bring it back for the values and the cultural beliefs. But I totally forgot that there were people always watching us build those canoes. And to use it and how do we develop it. So that to me opened my mind to like, and now this canoe needs to go out even farther and do more things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where those canoes are today. They're not just an art piece, they're actually going to be used, and that's something I look forward to.
I think that's, I don't think you can say enough how important it is, because when I was 13 years old and I saw a canoe on the wall, why would I care?
Yeah.
And none of my friends cared. Why would you? Maybe there's one kid in the group that likes that type of thing, so he's looking at it or something. But plunk that canoe in the water.
Yeah.
And you don't have to teach us.
No.
We'll bail in and we'll go from there, and then we'll learn the history and culture, which it is a Canadian culture.
Yeah.
It is our story, because that story is very intertwined in over the last 200, 300 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, it baffles me that it's taken this long, and it's sad in a way, because a lot of people grew up without it.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up without it, because I would have loved to get in a canoe.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved to get in a canoe. I mean, when I was a little kid, we pretended that like logs were canoes, and and friends from Skeetcheston would come up and we'd all play and all that stuff, but we never got that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so now that and you need the art, of course, you need the art on the wall. But that making it real and tangible, that especially for young people, and I think you're right. Not young people, just Indigenous young people. All of the kids that are growing up in these communities, they just miss out on it. If it stays on the wall, they'll miss out on it, and it's as simple as that. They won't look. They might go on one field trip. That's it.
Yeah. Well, again, we both grew up in through the Ashcroft school, high school. The cool thing about that, when I built this project, the number one school that came out first of all was Ashcroft.
Oh, was it?
And all of those kids' parents who we played hockey with, the Beckett's and the Hunt, all these different family names back there, their kids were coming in now to learn about those canoes, where their dads, like you, we played, but we never done it. Now the kids actually done it. And they stuck with this canoe from the beginning, middle, and end. So it was good to see that next I guess for me, the next generation coming up, actually touching and experiencing it. And that's something that needs to still fester and grow. And I think what's happening now, again, because of the cultural disruption, I call it, and what you call Canadian, I don't call our culture as a culture anymore in my head, because it's more of a heritage.
I remember you said that.
And we're blending our cultures in different forms and ways now, and that's not going to be stopped.
Yeah.
Again, so for me, how do we make it a heritage, and how do we? And I always laugh, because I always say, what puts us all together and takes away all of that is hockey. All right. When the Olympics come on, hockey is.
You have no idea how often hockey comes up on the show, and Gowdy is not a fan.
Yeah.
So our goal next year is basically just to make you a hockey fan. It's going to happen.
I watch hockey. I do when I go to a restaurant and it's on. I'm like, oh, it's like hockey.
We got to put you on skates then. I'll bring a pair of skates for you versus the work boots.
We need to do a skate tour down the river.
But it's definitely, if you grew up in definitely in the woods or wherever, there was always a pond or a place to skate, especially the boys. We definitely found that as
and my sisters
and a place, a serenity place where you just can be a kid.
Yeah.
And every age group came together, and it didn't matter. And you always had mentors and people that you followed. poor me, I become a goalie. So I said I didn't know how to skate, but apparently goalies are a better skater than a guy out. I don't know. I told him, depends if you fall down and try to get up with your gear.
Yeah.
You're a fish out of water. So
Actually, you used my brother's pads at one
yes,
point. Yeah.
that's what started my career
Yeah.
was your brother's
My
pads.
my late brothers, I think my dad gave Skeechiston the
Yeah,
goalie pads, right?
and they couldn't find a goalie. Well, they did have a goalie, but I don't think he was a goalie. I wasn't any better. I'll put it that way. I'm not trying to put him down. It just felt like I just had more of a passion for it. And
Yeah.
again, growing up, I never had the opportunity to play hockey. But when I hit my adult years, I got to now get back involved, and that's how I've been involved now for God 50, going on 34 years. And it just feels like yesterday. Still
Yeah.
to me, I'm still that kid when I put on the gear, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Definitely enjoyable.
Yeah. I was curious about something. Did you growing up, have you, I mean, now you're immersed in culture and in not in just your not just in your heritage, but in the heritage of all these different communities around British Columbia, and you've been traveling, and we'll just start here for now. How much of what you know of your heritage, your culture, your people was learned as a kid as opposed to now that you've kind of went in and really got involved in it?
Well, I always say there's two different types. One that's mind, one that's body.
Mm.
The body one was simple. We picked, we gathered, we hunted, we fished. That was kind of most of the teachings I've had growing up. But as I got older, I started learning more about the long hair and again, it's all borrowed Indigenous practices. It was never something that was brought into our territory. It was something we brought in individually,
Mm-hmm.
and we shared that. The sun dances, the winter, the smudges, the sweat lodges, the different spiritual practices. But it all had the same purpose at the end. At the bottom line, it had a purpose, and that was to take care of yourself, your family. It goes up the chain
Mm-hmm.
as far as people, and also respecting the land and the animals. And for me, the cultural aspect of it now is really shown who I am, why I wear what I wear. This is an elk vest that my friend made, and she asked me, "What would you want to represent?" I said, "Well, I've always worked. I don't know. Bears always seem to be drawn to me, even though I'm not from a bear clan, like from the Carrier or from the West Coast. How they label, or from back east, how they label themselves as different groups. Again, every culture has a different form." And our culture was more, like you said earlier, when you looked at the canoe on the wall, we had working art. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't art you put on the wall and got to look at it. We actually had to use it and to survive.
Well, back then it was hard life up
Yeah,
there. I mean,
yeah,
that's rugged territory.
yeah. And I guess
Yeah.
the only insight I can show people that kind of lifestyle was when you seen the movie Revenant
Mm.
with Leo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
That really shows you how harsh the conditions were, and there was no forgiveness to
Yeah.
anything or anyone. Uh, Eat to be eaten kind of
Yeah.
attitude, right? So for me, the culture, I started learning more and more. I started learning again through different mentors. I always looked for, I guess, growing up through my personal journey, I've always looking for that one guy to be the mentor and show me everything I needed to know, like a father figure should have, or a male figure should have. And when I was going through my personal healing journey, I got grabbed by an elder, brought me to the mirror, and says, "He's right there." And I looked in the mirror, and that was me. I had to fill up that jar of knowledge and wanting to learn, and I was who I was, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why again, my personality is so easy to get along with people because I've always asked questions, and once you finally go through that motion, it changed I, my thought of thinking, how do you pass on these traditions and how do you pass on these opportunities, not only to yourself, but through the guests and visitors that you interact with in the tourism industry, but also educating your peers or your coworkers of what the culture means, and then really how does it mean to you every day. So again, I always said when I started getting involved with the Indigenous tourism industry, it wasn't a job, wasn't a career, it was a lifestyle. And it shows in who you are when you start following
Mm-hmm.
your lifestyle because it comes naturally. It's not something you set up or stage. So that's what authenticity, and that's what I really want to bring to the tourism industry is that story, that individual story, community story, nation story, and international. So I really got the opportunity to travel and move around the world this last couple 12 months. I would say I visited 7 countries, and boy, I got to see a variety of different cultures, rich cultures. And when I look at Canada, I always look back and flying home. We're such a young country. We're babies compared to what the world is around us, and we really need to get along. And I think we have it right, and it's really cool because I think sometimes with the industries we follow and we chase that comfort of life or lifestyle, sometimes we work too hard. We work to live. And reality, when I go to Europe, they live to work. It's totally reversed.
Or they work to live.
Yeah.
They work to live.
They live to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny that you say that. I say that with my husband all the time about Central America.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. That over there, you work to live, and here
you live to work.
Yeah, you live to work.
Yeah, it's reversed, right?
It's reversed, yeah.
And it's just the casual of eating dinner at 9 o'clock. It's not 5 o'clock and be in bed at this time. It's not structured. It's structured in a way where people can relax and they bring their families out. Kids are running around 11, midnight. It's just so relaxed. And next day they start over again.
Yeah.
And then when they take their days off, they take their days off. But you just, you kind of grow through that and to get those experiences to come home. And I can tell you one thing, why Indigenous people struggle in some ways, because that's exactly how we live. We're not out there to make the $1 million. And there's some are now, the next generation that's coming are going down that path and want to be successful. And there's people in our generation who are like, we're just happy to have what we have, and live the way we live. We live very simple lives. So, and that shows in how we take care of our natural resources around us, and that's really huge to us, though.